Today I have got in front of me Dicken Bettinger. Some of you will know Dicken if you have come across the three principles understanding or the innate health understanding. Welcome, Dicken. So lovely to have you.
Lovely to be here, Rani. Thank you for having me.
Well, I am so grateful, Dicken, when you said yes. When I explained to you in the form of an email, my idea is to do something long term for anyone who either has a diagnosis of some kind of mental health condition or they have the symptoms that will fulfill the criteria of a diagnosis. They might have thought that having a diagnosis and taking medication or having therapy would somehow help them transform their lives, and maybe they have come to realize that there's still something missing. So I wanted to create a program which I have named Beyond Diagnosis, and then you said, Rani, I'm so happy to support you with that.
It's a very important area because at times everybody struggles and has difficulty and wants desperately to understand what's going on and be able to get back to having some peace of mind and happiness. I think everybody wants that. And I had been a psychologist for 10 years before coming across the principles. And as a psychologist, we were trained, like I know you probably were, to look for where people were having the greatest difficulty. Now, that's understandable, isn't it? I mean, it seems like, well, that's where people are having the most difficulty. So you look for where they have the most difficulty. So when people came into my office, I was looking for their brokenness. I was looking for their greatest difficulty. And then that became the subject of our sessions. So we were looking for what people were like when they were at their worst, and then focusing on it, thinking about it, talking about it with really good intentions to help people become happier and healthier. And I never questioned that fundamental assumption and approach. It just was what everybody was doing. So then it made sense then that diagnoses were developed, which were just ways of saying, well, we can label the kinds of things you do when you're at your worst. But unfortunately, as often happens with labels, people begin to identify with them and think that's who I am. I am this label. And when I met Syd Banks, he was someone who was not interested in focusing on what was wrong with people. He was interested in focusing on the absolute perfect well-being that everybody has inside, and that's the quickest way to help us resolve our struggles and to return to well-being is by focusing in that direction. Now, this was a radical change in perspective. And when I started doing that in my own life, almost immediately I had insights about well-being, which is the beauty of a course like you're doing, Rani, giving people a chance to have their own insights about their own well-being and how our thinking gets in the way to cover it up. And when people begin to have those insights, I started finding that people started dropping out of all the thinking they were holding on to that was creating their struggle, their suffer, their guilt, their upset, their anxiety, their depression. And as they dropped more and more of that thinking, they became more fully present. And when they became more fully present, they began to access these deeper feelings of well-being that are within everyone. I couldn't believe it. It happened that way for me, and then I watched it begin to happen with my kids, and then I started seeing it happen with my clients. And I used to see clients for 6 months to 2 years because I believed it took a long time for you to get into this mess, and we have to look at all of it and sort through it and make sense of it. It'll take years to try and help you cope better with your illness. And all of a sudden, I'm having 3 to 10 sessions with those same people with those same problems, and they're walking out maintaining levels of well-being they didn't know were possible. The most rewarding thing in my life has been watching people that I work with begin to discover this space within them that's already free of suffering and full of well-being. And then learn more about how thought is the only thing that covers it up and gets in the way of it.
Mm.
And that can set a person free. I had never heard people before I came across Syd Banks talk about if you have been labeled with a severe psychiatric problem, that there's a cure. And the cure is just having less and less of the thinking that torments us and more of the feelings of well-being that uplift us and guide us through life
Mm.
in a beautiful way.
Yeah. Yeah. Beautiful. You know, Deacon, what I'm hearing is that very innocently, we are looking at the complex picture and we are trying to analyze the complex picture. I remember being part of a team where we would discuss cases and the psychologist would say, this is a very complex person. And then when we
Yes,
talk about the next one, the psychologist will say that this is another very complex person. And I was like, wow, yes, you know, when we look at the stories and all the stuff that happened to people,
complicated.
yes, where you point people to, and where Sydney Banks and everyone who's been sharing the three principles you're pointing to is the simplicity beyond all the complexity, isn't it? And that's where we don't look.
Absolutely. Absolutely. When I first met Syd Banks at that time in psychology, Yale University did a research study on the number of psychological approaches to helping people. And there were 450. So it not only was people were complicated, but psychology as a field seemed very complicated because everybody had different opinions about why people were suffering and what we could do about it. And so I learned all these theories that got more and more complicated. And then I'd see people, and there'd be so many variabilities of ways in which they were having difficulty. You're right. It seemed like endless complication and so much to try and analyze and figure out. Then Syd Banks comes along and says there are 3 foundational forces behind life that create every moment of our psychological experience. Storm clouds part and there's blue sky, and in that blue sky always there's a sun that brings warmth and nourishment. I see people the same way. People walk into my office after I learn the principles. I'd walk in and say, wow, I know inside of you is absolute beauty and love and kindness and warmth. It's right in there. And it's just being covered up because you're caught up in thought and holding on to it, thinking it's true. So I went from having thousands of diagnoses to having one for every person. Every human being is inherently mentally healthy at core, and at times all of us get caught up in our thinking, hold on to it and think it's true, and then we suffer while we're doing that. That's true of every person I've ever met on this planet. And the good news is, though, that we have built into us everything we need to wake up to the nature of how our minds work, to understand I live in a world of thought, to understand that as my thinking quiets down, there's this alive presence where I start enjoying the moment again. Working with people clinically depressed who begin to wake up, and I can point out to them right now, you're not depressed. And they'll go, yes, I am. That's my diagnosis. And I say, but right now, in this moment, your head just cleared, and look at you. We were laughing. We were having this grand time. And it seems like that's true for anybody when their head clears, because it's in you already. And the relief, Rani, when I heard this, even being a psychologist for 10 years, I had never heard anybody say, Dicken, you have perfect well-being inside at all times. And when I heard Syd Banks say that to me, I cried. It was such a relief because it rang true on a deeper level. I think everybody knows this. On a deeper level, it rang true. So that's the hope. That's why I love that you're doing this course, is to help people have hope that no matter how I've been in the past, no matter how much nightmare thinking I've been caught up in, I can wake up from my nightmare and go, oh, thank God that was just a dream, and discover a whole nother world of presence and warmth and kindness and love.
Yeah, beautiful, beautiful. And one thing that came to me when you're saying all this is like how um, I guess we can be our worst critic. And sometimes people say, oh God, why
Okay.
do I have to
Yeah.
have the diagnosis?
Compassion is just the opposite of judgmental thinking, the absence of judgmental thinking. So if I, at any moment, start to have judgmental thinking about another person, I'm having these negative thoughts, and I'm going to feel that negativity, not because of the person, but because of my thinking. So I won't feel compassion for that person. I'll feel my thinking of judgment about that person. Now, if I look at myself and I have judgmental thoughts, I should have known better, what's wrong with me, I'm bad, I'm wrong, I will feel that thinking because we feel whatever thoughts we have. And when I begin to realize, wait a minute, I'm the thinker, holding on to these judgmental thoughts are making me suffer. Then we let go of that thinking. That's one way of talking about forgiveness, is just letting go of negative thought. It's letting go of the judgments. And when we let go of the judgments, we start feeling more compassionate toward other people and towards ourselves. This happened to me. I would see my kids really upset, and sometimes I would take it personally. So I'd have a lot of judgmental thoughts about how they were being, and then I'd feel bad and think they were making me feel bad. I start learning how this works. I start realizing, wait a minute, I'm holding on to all these heavy negative thoughts that keep me being bothered, annoyed, frustrated, impatient, and upset. Who's suffering here? By my holding these thoughts, who's suffering? they're going off doing their thing, and I'm walking around feeling bad. And when I started to see that and let that go, I started having more compassion for my own suffering.
Beautiful.
Rani, honestly, I did. I started having more compassion and saying, oh, wow, it's easy for any of us to get caught up in thought that make us feel stressed and upset. It's so easy for that to happen. And thank goodness we can be aware of that. We're conscious beings. And when I let go of that thinking, I feel better. Then I'd see my kids suffering and I'd go, oh, it's innocent. They're just caught up in their thoughts and they don't know that's the problem. Now that's compassion. I was just caught up in my thoughts and I didn't realize it. No wonder I was suffering. That's compassion toward myself.
Mm.
So compassion and understanding are really the same thing. When I began to understand that people were thinkers and they were going to feel whatever they were thinking, I had more compassion for people, because most people, if you come up to them while they're suffering and say, why are you stressed? Why are you angry? Why are you sad? Why are you guilty? Rarely would you find someone who says, oh, well, that's obvious why I feel this way. It's what I'm thinking. You see how innocent it is? It's to see the innocence in people is to have compassion for them.
Yeah. Yeah. Gosh. I get so trapped in this, Dicken, and then I see it, and it's like, oh,
I know. We all get caught up. That's part of compassion too, is going, oh, sometimes I get caught up, other people get caught up. You see the innocence of it, you are less and less judgmental. You see it's just part of being human.
yeah,
You begin to see that, begin to be grateful that you can at some point catch yourself caught up in thought and fall out of it. If you ever see that tension, stress, or upset is thought, you'll let go of the thoughts that are creating it. It'll bring you right back to the now. And it's only in the now that we can access well-being. You can't access it while you're holding on to negative thought. I can't. We don't. I don't. No one does. All right. We come back to the present moment. And in the present moment, all of that negative thinking starts to quiet down. Just naturally. It happens for anyone. And then as it quiets down, we start to feel more relief, more relaxed, more open. We get even quieter. We start feeling love and understanding, compassion.
absolutely. Oh, this is so beautiful, beautiful, Dicken. People say that it takes 21 days or how many days to form a new habit. And I'm thinking, what would happen in 365 days if we are looking in this direction?
Rani, let me tell you something that I think is the most radical part of Syd Banks' teaching. He said every human being, no matter what they're experiencing at any moment, they're a thought away from the present moment. One thought away from well-being. One thought away from being open, where our thinking begins to flow and quiet down, and where well-being begins to shine through. That is hopeful. I had never, ever, still to this day, I don't know anybody else who's talking about we're one thought away from everything we're looking for, but we don't know it. Most adults, when they feel tension, stress, or upset, don't immediately come back to the present moment. They do more thinking. And no one can think their way to well-being. It's when our thinking quiets down, well-being always emerges. So that was huge. That was life-changing for me. The more I learn the truth of that. So I can have hope for my clients. By being warm and kind and listening, they start becoming more present. And when people are more present, they're more open to getting new and fresh thinking or insights. And it's people's insights that change them. And we're built to have insights. I've worked with people who are tormented and struggling, and all of a sudden they start to wake up, and the insights they have about these principles brings them back to the now. And then they start to be aware of the feeling that comes in as they're resting in the now. And it changes their life. It gives them hope. They realize it's true. I have well-being innately. I have well-being built into me. I was born with it. It's always there. It can't be hurt or damaged because it's formless. It's spirit. It's energy. It can't be damaged.
You said we are only one thought away. I'm not saying you need to join this program in order to have an insight. No, I'm not saying that at all. But I'm saying anyone who is part of this program, I don't know how they are not going to have an insight. You see what I mean?
People are built to have insight, and there's nothing in this course to figure out if people just begin to listen quietly. We're built to have insights, and I guarantee you'll get new and fresh thinking.
Yeah. Yeah. And life will never be the same again with the diagnosis and with the symptoms and that kind of thing.
Hope is the most beautiful thing in the world for people. It really is. It gave me hope that not only do I have well-being inside, but my kids do, and my wife does, and my clients do, and my friends do. And I started seeing people differently, which allowed me to have less and less judgment of people. So I suffered less.
This is so exciting, Dicken. Thank you so much for your time today.
I'm excited about coming back and to have a couple hours to be able to go more deeply into this
Beautiful.
and to answer questions. I love talking to people and answering their questions about this. That's how I learned.
Wow. People are in for a treat. Thank you,
They're
Dicken.
in for a treat. Yeah.